Hello there, welcome depths of unknown. There is a continent at the bottom of the world that has been locked in ice for the last 34 million years. And beneath that ice, beneath kilometers of compressed frozen water accumulated over geological time, there is a record of a world so different from our own that the creatures it produced seem less like real animals and more like the products of an imagination unconstrained by biological limits. Antarctica was not always a frozen desert. It was not always isolated, not always cold, not always a place where nothing grows. For hundreds of millions of years before the ice came, it was a warm, wet, biologically productive landmass connected to the other continents, bathed by shallow seas, forested by ancient trees, and populated by creatures whose fossilized remains are now being extracted from rock by paleontologists working in conditions that are themselves nearly unsurvivable. What Antarctica reveals about ancient monsters is not a metaphor. It is a literal, physical record of animals that lived and died on this continent when it was something entirely other than what it is now. Animals whose size, ferocity, and biological strangeness exceed anything alive today by margins that sound like exaggeration but are, in fact, careful scientific documentation. The story of Antarctica's ancient monsters begins with the continent's geological history because without understanding how Antarctica came to be where it is, the animals that live there become incomprehensible. Antarctica was once part of the supercontinent Gondwana, the massive southern landmass that also included what would become South America, Africa, Australia, India, and New Zealand. For hundreds of millions of years, these landmasses were connected, and Antarctica sat far from the poles in a temperate to subtropical climate that supported lush vegetation and complex ecosystems. The breakup of Gondwana was one of the most consequential geological events in the history of life on Earth, and it happened slowly, over tens of millions of years, until Antarctica was finally isolated at the South Pole and the Drake Passage opened between Antarctica and South America. That opening, approximately 34 million years ago, allowed the Antarctic Circumpolar Current to establish itself, thermally isolating the continent and initiating the glaciation that has covered it ever since. But before the ice came, Antarctica was alive in ways the frozen continent cannot hint at today. The Cretaceous period, roughly 145 to 66 million years ago, was the age of the most extreme biological productivity and diversity the Earth has ever seen. Atmospheric carbon dioxide was dramatically elevated compared to today. Global temperatures were significantly warmer. The poles were ice-free, and Antarctica, sitting at or near the South Pole during this period, was not a frozen wasteland but a forested landscape warmed by the greenhouse effect to temperatures that allowed complex ecosystems to flourish even through the months of polar night. The forests of Cretaceous Antarctica were dominated by conifers and ferns, with flowering plants beginning to diversify in the warmer coastal regions. And the seas that surrounded and partially covered Antarctica during the Cretaceous were among the most productive and biologically extraordinary marine environments in the history of the planet. Shallow, warm, rich in nutrients, and populated by animals of a scale and variety that the modern ocean has no equivalent for. The most dramatic of Antarctica's ancient monsters were the marine reptiles, animals that had returned to the ocean from terrestrial ancestors and evolved into forms of astonishing size and diversity. The plesiosaurs were among the most successful, and the Antarctic fossil record has produced specimens that challenge the imagination. Elasmosaurids, the long-necked plesiosaurs with necks constituting up to half their total body length, reached 15 meters in Antarctic waters, hunting fish and squid in the Cretaceous shallow seas with a combination of stealth, reach, and speed that no living marine predator quite matches. Picture an animal the size of a city bus with a neck as long as the bus itself, extending forward through the water with a relatively small head capable of striking at fish from distances the prey could not anticipate. The neck was flexible and articulated, moving in multiple planes. The animal used it the way a heron strikes at fish in the shallows, except this was a Cretaceous sea and the heron was 15 meters long. But the elasmosaurids were not the only marine reptile horror Antarctic waters produced. The mosasaurs, a family of large marine lizards that diversified explosively in the last 30 million years of the Cretaceous, reached their most extreme forms in Antarctic waters. Mosasaurus hoffmanni reached lengths of up to 17 meters. The Antarctic mosasaurs include Prognathodon, a robust form with teeth designed for crushing rather than piercing, recovered from Antarctic deposits. These animals were not pursuing fish in open water. They were crushing the shells of large ammonites, cephalopods with coiled shells reaching a meter in diameter, and the dental architecture of these crushing mosasaurs is the physical record of an evolutionary arms race that escalated over millions of years to produce animals on both sides of the interaction with no modern equivalent in any ocean on Earth. The ammonites themselves deserve recognition as Antarctic ancient monsters, because at their largest, they were not the modest coiled shells we see in fossil shops. Parapozosia seponradensis, the largest known ammonite, reached a shell diameter of approximately 2.55 meters, a coiled shell nearly the diameter of a small car, containing an animal with tentacles and a jet propulsion system, hunting in the Cretaceous seas. Antarctic deposits have produced large ammonite specimens, and the diversity of ammonite forms in the Cretaceous Antarctic seas was extraordinary: ribbed, keeled, uncoiled, tightly coiled, heteromorph forms with bizarre irregular shapes that seem to defy the logic of an organism that is supposed to be able to move efficiently through the water. The ammonites were among the most successful marine animals of all time, existing for approximately 340 million years before their extinction at the end of the Cretaceous, and the Antarctic fossil record preserves a chapter of their story that is still being read. The marine reptile world of Cretaceous Antarctica also included the plesiosaurs, short-necked, large-headed predators that occupied the same ecological role as killer whales in the modern ocean, except that killer whales reach perhaps 9 meters, while the largest plesiosaurs reached 15 to 17 meters, with skulls up to 3 meters in length. Heavily built with conical teeth the size of bananas, capable of generating bite forces paleontologists estimate exceeded those of any animal before or since. These animals hunted in the warm Cretaceous seas covering parts of what is now Antarctica. The skull of a large plesiosaur from Antarctic deposits is a physical object that produces an immediate, visceral understanding of what it meant to be at the top of a Cretaceous marine food chain. The bite radius could accommodate a full-grown, modern great white shark. Its prey were themselves predators, elasmosaurids, large fish, other marine reptiles. A predator that preyed on predators in an ocean that was, by every assessment, more dangerous than any that has existed since. On land, Cretaceous Antarctica was not as richly fossiliferous as its marine environments, but what has been found tells a story of a continent that participated fully in the biological exchanges of the Mesozoic world. Dinosaur fossils have been recovered from Antarctica, enough to confirm that the continent was part of the connected Gondwana landmass. Cryolophosaurus elioti, discovered in 1991, was a predatory theropod, approximately 6 to 8 meters in length, that lived in the early Jurassic on a continent already moving toward the pole. It had a distinctive forward-facing crest on its skull, unlike any other known theropod, earning it the informal name Elvasaurus from the paleontologists who found it, for the pompadour-like sweep of bone above its eyes. This animal lived in a climate that experienced polar night, hunting prey in darkness for months at a time in forests of ancient conifers, a biological reality that adds strangeness to an already remarkable animal. The Jurassic and Triassic periods also left records in Antarctic rock, records that extend the continent's paleontological history back before the age of the great marine reptiles and dinosaurs. Prosauropod dinosaurs, early relatives of the massive sauropods that would later dominate terrestrial ecosystems, have been found in Antarctic Triassic deposits. Prehistoric, mammal-like reptiles, the synapsids that preceded and in some lineages gave rise to the mammals, are also represented in the Antarctic fossil record, demonstrating that the continent was part of the story of vertebrate evolution from very early in that story's development. Antarctica was not a sidebar in the history of life. It was a central chapter, connected to the other land masses where the major events of vertebrate evolution were occurring. participating in the same evolutionary processes and producing the same kinds of biological diversity. The Paleogene period, after the end Cretaceous extinction, when mammals and birds diversified into roles vacated by the non-avian dinosaurs, produced some of the most remarkable Antarctic animals in the fossil record. Because Antarctica was still connected to South America and Australia in the early Paleogene, the continent participated in the evolutionary radiation of the new post-extinction fauna. Giant penguins are among the most dramatic. Paleoteoptes pleikoskiai, from Antarctic fossil deposits, reached an estimated height of 1.65 meters and a mass of approximately 115 kilograms, taller than most adult humans, heavier than any modern penguin by nearly a factor of 4. These were not the charming waddling birds of nature documentaries. They were large, heavy, powerful diving animals, built on a scale that made them apex predators of the early Paleogene Antarctic seas, rather than the prey items that modern penguins can sometimes be. The Paleogene Antarctic seas also witnessed the early diversification of the whales. The Archaeocetes, primitive whales retaining features of their terrestrial ancestors, were diversifying in the Southern Ocean around Antarctica. The progression to the fully aquatic basilosaurids, sleek serpentine animals reaching 15 to 20 meters, happened in part in these waters. Basilosaurus itself, with its long body and vestigial hind limbs, was a predator of the Paleogene Ocean, as formidable in its way as the plesiosaurs and mosasaurs that preceded it. The lineage that would eventually produce the blue whale, the largest animal in the history of life on Earth, was established in part in waters that once lapped the shores of a still warm Antarctica. The transition to glaciation that began approximately 34 million years ago ended the period of warm Antarctic biodiversity, but did not immediately end all life. The fossil record shows a gradual transition as species assemblages changed, some surviving, others disappearing, as the continent cooled and the ice advanced. The geological record of this transition is one of the most important scientific documents we have for understanding how life responds to major climate shifts. The patterns of extinction and survival in the Antarctic fossil record as the climate cooled are a direct empirical window into what biological communities do when confronted with rapid environmental change, which species are resilient, which are vulnerable, and where the biological thresholds beyond which recovery becomes impossible actually sit. The current state of Antarctic paleontology is one of the most exciting frontiers in science, partly because the logistics are so extreme that the fossil record remains dramatically undersampled. Paleontologists working in Antarctica operate under conditions severe enough to be genuinely dangerous. Extreme cold, high winds, logistical constraints that make every excavation season both expensive and hazardous. Rock exposures where fossils are found are often accessible only for a few weeks per year, and yet the return from that effort has been consistently astonishing. Nearly every major expedition returns with specimens that surprise the scientific community. New species, new size records, new evidence of biological richness that the frozen surface gives no indication of whatsoever. The ice itself is revealing things. As climate change causes the retreat of Antarctic ice in certain coastal and peripheral areas, rock exposures that have been covered for millions of years are becoming accessible for the first time in the history of modern science. This is not a silver lining to climate change. It is a catastrophic process with consequences that dwarf any paleontological benefit. But it is a reality that Antarctic paleontologists are working within, and the newly exposed rock is yielding specimens that were previously completely inaccessible. The ancient monsters of Antarctica are emerging from the ice, slowly, incompletely, in fragments that require years of preparation and study before they yield their secrets, but emerging nonetheless into a world that is equipped for the first time to understand what they were. What Antarctica ultimately reveals about ancient monsters is something more than a catalogue of impressive extinct animals. It reveals that the Earth has been, at various points in its history, a profoundly different place. Warmer, more productive, supporting organisms of a scale our current world cannot match. The marine ecosystems of Cretaceous Antarctica were more dangerous than any ocean today. The apex predators of those seas were larger, more powerful, and more ecologically dominant than any marine predator alive now. The forests of pre-glacial Antarctica supported polar dinosaurs on a continent now biologically barren. And the rock that preserves the record of all of this is there, at the bottom of the world, under ice that is itself part of the story. 18,000 meters of rock beneath the Antarctic ice contain a history of life on Earth that we have barely begun to read. The ancient monsters that lived on and around this continent. The 15-meter plesiosaurs, the crushing mosasaurs, the giant penguins, the early whales. The polar dinosaurs hunting through Jurassic night were as real as the ice that now covers their world. They lived and hunted and competed and evolved and went extinct on the same patch of planetary surface that now sits frozen at the bottom of the world. Antarctica does not just reveal ancient monsters, it preserves them, in stone, in sediment, in the geological memory of a planet that has been many things and will be many things again. And as the ice retreats, what it reveals is not just the past. It is a mirror, imperfect, ancient, incomplete, held up to a world that is changing and asking what that change, at this speed, in this direction, has meant before.